Welcome, everyone. I can see many people are joining on the line right now, so we'll give everyone a few more minutes to allow more attendees to join, and we'll be starting the session shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. And Christina, did you see the chat? Are you okay on the chat? Great. Just wanted to see our numbers. Okay, great. And also on our private chat. Great.
All right. Again, I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for Max People's session on Workplace Synergy, Exploring Generational Perspectives. My name is Christina Binder, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator at Max People, and I will be assisting with the moderation and the production for today. This session today is facilitated by Julie Rubin-Rodney, CEO and founder of Max People, and Dalia Shapsov, HR advisor from Max People. And we're so thrilled that to be here with you today to share our knowledge. Before we get started, I want to do a few housekeeping items. Today's session is intended to have a Q&A portion towards the latter half, so we encourage you to submit your questions at any time using the chat function. I'll be keeping track of these questions and will moderate them at the end. Also, at the end of this session, there is a resource available for all attendees to download and a feedback QR code to scan so we can improve our future webinars. We greatly appreciate your feedback. To ensure high quality of the webinar, I ask that you ensure that you have a strong internet connection, and please also close any unnecessary browser pages and apps running in the background. If you experience any quality issues during the session, please first try to exit and re-enter the live stream via the link that was sent to you upon registration. The webinar today is being recorded and will be available for viewing afterwards. Without further ado, I will pass it on to our facilitators to begin.
So thank you, Christina, for always setting us up for success. We're pleased to have you all here today, and for myself to be able to work with Dalia, what a pleasure. So we've been asked the question many, many times as an organization, how do we create engaged workplaces across generations? We have clients of all different sizes, all different industries, and it keeps coming up over and over again around how do we engage people across organizations, across generations. And so today's webinar on Workplace Synergy, Exploring Generational Perspectives, is going to take a deeper dive into how do we answer that question and how do we as leaders and organizations work that way. And so at Max People, we look at helping people in business be more focused, happy, and productive at work and in life. And that purpose statement was created a number of years ago when myself was establishing the organization and bringing our people together. And this was something, Stephen Covey said, start with the end in mind. And really the end in mind, we are all really building those type of workplaces, trying to build those type of workplaces where we are building those happy, focused, and productive workplaces. Just want to make sure the line is clear for everyone. I was hearing a little bit of background noise. Hopefully it's clear for everyone. And so when we look at those engaged workforces, we're trying to figure out how do we bring people together. And almost 25 years ago, I did my master's degree in workplace learning and change. And when I was doing my work back then, I was trying to figure out, we're going to go through ebbs and flows as a business and as an organization, and try to figure out how do we over time in organizations really ensure that we ebb and flow through the changes. And we're going to talk today about a lot of changes that we've seen over the last 25 years and well before then, and how do we adjust to that in organizations. So if we go ahead and talk about what are we going to talk about today, our key concepts are understanding generational traits while avoiding biases. That's the first thing we really want to dive into. Secondly, we're going to explore the changes in our workplace, but also how that has also had to adjust to our workforce changes. And then we're going to look at identifying and addressing individual motivators to foster team energy, because that's what we're looking for, a really great amount of team energy. So if we look at moving forward to a little bit about me, sorry, something's popping up here on the screen, a little bit about me. So why am I the one who's working with Dahlia today on this? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about me. As you know, I'm Julie Rubin Rodney. I was born in 1971. You can see back in my time, Sassoon was in fashion. That was a big thing. There's a picture of myself with my dad and my sister. I was born, as I said, in 1971. And back then when we were skiing, there were no helmets. So you can see the time when things have changed. Belts were very in fashion, all these funky belts, bows in your hair. You can see my grade 9 prom picture. I am a mother of 3 children, and my children are Gen Zs who are now entering the workforce. So very much I'm leading an organization of multiple generations. Well, I have my children who are entering the workforce as Gen Zs and are working. And then I have my parents' picture here, as you can see, who are a combination of traditionalists and boomers. And an aging, that aging population. You can see my father has his walker, he's had a stroke, and that happened at the beginning of COVID. So that's a little bit about some of my life. And then, important to today's for sure is that I lead an organization. There's our team picture at our summer social. And our team is a group of a lot of leaders who are millennials and Gen Zs entering the workforce and working with us. And that really leads me to pass you over to Dahlia to tell you a little bit about herself and what she brings to this presentation and the organization.
Thanks so much, Julie. Those are great pictures. I love the prom one. So I was born just before the new millennium in 1999, which technically makes me a 90s baby, but for some reason, anyone before 1997 loves to debate me on it. My family represents 4 generations. My dad is a baby boomer. My mom is Gen X. My boyfriend Cameron is a millennial, and my brother Zach and I are Gen Z. I was in my 3rd year of undergrad when COVID hit and everything went virtual. Connecting in the classroom turned into raising a virtual hand in a Zoom room with 200 cameras off students. Then facing the COVID job market, I decided to go back to school. So the bottom right picture is at my graduation from U of T with my Master of Industrial Relations in HR. I officially started my HR career at the beginning of 2023, working in-house HR at the Ritz-Carlton, an over 100-year hotel chain that really leans into tradition. I got to work with a mix of generations there, Gen Z, people even younger than me, millennials, Gen X, and even some baby boomers.
So you've heard Dahlia and I talk a little bit about dropping name, Gen Zs and Gen X and traditionalists, but now let's tell you a little bit about what these generations are. So traditionalists, as you can see here, between 1922 and 1945, there are still some traditionalists working in our workplaces today. They are 79 plus in age. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1965, anywhere between 58 and 78 years old. And I'm telling you this so you can start thinking about what generation maybe you fall into. Our Gen X's, which is myself, born between 1966 and 1980. So we're between the ages of 44 and 57. Our Generation Ys, or millennials as we call them, are born between 1981 and 1996, and between 28 and 43. And then our Gen Zs are sometimes called Zoomers, born between 1997 and 2012, which is between 12 and 27. So we do have some of those, definitely entering the workforce now. And so my question to you, when you really look at those ages and stages of the generational areas within the workplace, where do you fit and where do you fall? So in the chat function, we do have a live chat there. You can see there's some places that you can post in there, and we're kind of asking you, don't tell us what year you were born. You can just kind of tell us what generation you are, just to give us a sense of who's on the webinar and what generations you are coming from. I'll give you a minute to pull some up. So Christina, are you seeing some of the chat come up and where people are putting in their?
Yes, so we have some Gen X's, some millennials, Generation Z's. So it looks like it's a good mix.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the overall population in a moment and how that's really changed in our workforce over the last even 5 years around the ratios between each in the workplace. So let me tell you what that looks like. So in 2015, when we looked at the world of work, obviously, Gen Zs were 1% of the population, and we had a large group of boomers, 33%, 29% as millennials, and Gen X is 34%, traditionalists, a small amount at 3%. So if we take a snapshot in 2015, you can see definitely multiple generations. We talk about 5 generations being in the workforce, but how that has really changed as we start to see baby boomers retiring, traditionalists leaving the workforce, where really the pie looks quite different today if we look at 2023. We start to see Gen Zs being 19% of the population. I was telling Dahlia before we started this webinar how thrilled I am that we are doing this webinar together, because Dahlia is what brings the most interesting part to this webinar today, is the fact that we're hearing from a Gen Z. There's often, millennials and boomers who are creating generational strategies for workplaces, and they're not in tune and they're not spending enough time with Gen Zs to really know what the workplace needs to look like and adjust to as we grow as organizations. And so we are starting to see organizations talk about succession planning and retirement planning between our boomers and our millennials as our Gen Xers and as our Gen Xers are also eventually going to be moving more into our leadership roles. And now in those leadership roles, and millennials who are definitely the more of the leadership group that we are seeing. And so 35% of Canadian leaders are millennials. So as I said, now we're seeing a lot of my generation, Gen Xers, in those leadership roles, and that has grown over the years. But our generation is also moving out of those leadership roles, and millennials are coming into that. So even when you saw the picture of Max People, our leaders are millennials, with a few of us who are Gen Xers, but mostly millennials, and millennials who are leading Gen Zs. And when we think about what we're going to talk about today and what each of those generations may be looking for in their workplaces, and it makes a difference around how we work with one another and how we plan and how we guide and how we motivate. And those are all the topics that we look to explore today. So knowing that, let's take a step back for a moment and dive a little bit deeper into each of those generations we talked about. So boomers, what are boomers looking for? What do we know about the boomer generation? Well, the boomer generation, you can see the career ladder. They grew up in a time where, working hard and climbing the career ladder was fundamentally how they decided to come to the workplace and work. They very much were about just taking work. They may have not asked a lot of questions about why the work is why they were doing it. They were very much goal driven. They grew up in a time of more economic prosperity, and career growth was a very big part of what drove them. And in that climbing the corporate ladder, a lot of the ways they communicated with one another was much more face-to-face or pick up a phone. There wasn't the same level of technology during their time of starting their work as we obviously see today. And so what did they grow up on? They grew up on a lot more of, Leave It to Beaver and the Rolling Stones and, man landing on the moon and JFK and the Beatles and Elvis. And this is the genre that they grew up in. And if you weren't sure what generation you came from, if you missed that slide, you came in late, you can start thinking about, is this the time that, you were growing up in? So that's about our boomer group and understanding their mindset in the workplace and some of the things that may have shaped them. And we're going to talk about what shaped you in a moment. If we look at Generation X's, which is what I mentioned was mine, you see this balance. they started to question work-life balance and ask the question of, are there other things I could be doing? A little bit of my outside of just working. And in my generation, there was much more talk about, how do I prioritize my life a little bit between my work and also my personal life. So my story is Max People started in 2005. At that time, I had lost a very close friend. And when I lost that close friend, I decided I'd been at a downtown firm for 10 years. I had 2 young kids at the time. Now I have a third. And I really decided that I needed more work-life balance. And how could I lead an organization and get behind the purpose statement that really mattered to me and readjust. So anyone who's worked at Max People or works at Max People know that, we do really great work, but we want people to be at their kids' events and have balance in their life. So that's a little bit about me and myself and Gen X. We are still very much of a face-to-face culture. People will hear me say, turn on your cameras. We want to see you face-to-face, but also email came in much more in our generation. So people were more face-to-face and more email. Our generation was also considered more like the latchkey kids because more women were going to work and there were 2 parents working. And sometimes our generation is called the latchkey generation. And what was going on in our time? Well, you can see the Trudeau Senior there. What I find is so interesting in this one are the kids on bicycles. And that's a big memory for me is that, when you asked your kids to go play, it was less on technology and much more of getting outside and the sociability piece of being out and playing in the streets and playing with your friends was much more of our generation because we were also used to some more of that face-to-face. But don't get me wrong, we still liked our video games, but we probably went more to arcades and had a few Game Boys or things like that in our house. And that tells you a little bit about what the Gen X group was like. So I'm going to pass it over to Dahlia because she can explore a little bit more on the next generation.
So millennials are born between 1981 and 1996. We have the books here because millennials are cited as the most educated generation in history, with the highest rates of post-secondary completion compared to other generations. Millennials are known to be enthusiastic about learning new things and entrepreneurial minded. They grew up with the rise of the internet, and that really lowered barriers to starting your own business. In the workplace, they thrive in environments with collaboration and open communication. So tech shifts were the norm for millennials, from MySpace to smartphones. TV shows like Friends and The Fresh Prince were popular. And we also saw the rise of pop icons like Britney Spears and boy bands like the Backstreet Boys. Major events in the world like 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis deeply impacted millennials' views on security, finances, and politics. So moving on to Gen Zs, my generation. Gen Zs are born between 1997 and 2012. We're the first generation to grow up with smartphones and social media as this constant presence. Gen Zs are known for being highly adaptable, tech savvy, and also entrepreneurial like millennials. They value direct communication, but tend to gravitate towards quick, efficient methods like messaging apps, video calls, and other types of collaborative platforms. Gen Zs are purpose-driven and pragmatic, and they often prioritize stability and personal well-being in their careers. For Gen Zs, platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube are everyday staples. Shows like The Office and The OC, and books turned movies like Harry Potter and The Hunger Games really defined our teen years. Major events like COVID, the rise of climate activism, and social justice movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too have had a huge impact on Gen Z's worldview.
So Dahlia, really good overview of kind of what we grew up and what was going on in our time. We touched on a little bit around how each of these generations like to communicate. But as you can see from this picture, I'll have someone from my generation get in touch with someone from your generation. that is sometimes how it feels, is that we're both trying to figure out across generations, how do we communicate and how do we connect to one another? So my question to you is, how does this impact the way we communicate together, knowing that our preferences, sometimes generational, not always generational, but from the generational perspective, can really differ? So, have you heard some of these sayings before?
For sure. So for me, Julie, digital communication feels natural. And I really like to blend formal and informal styles when I'm communicating at work. And I know that a lot of other Gen Zs feel similarly. So, for example, if someone says, I messaged you, my mind right away goes to a message on Teams or Slack that kind of warrants that quick, immediate response. Whereas a Gen X might think of an email or even a voicemail and maybe would expect a reply within, let's say, standard business hours. Or even take the phrase, let's touch base. So Gen X or millennials might plan for a formal meeting, while Gen Z may see it as a casual, quick check-in over instant message. I think preferences around video calls are also really different. And I know that a lot of businesses are feeling that right now, with Gen X and millennials often seeing turning your camera on as a professional expectation, a non-negotiable really, whereas Gen Z may prefer it as optional. I know we accidentally skipped ahead to the next slide, but at some point we were all children. And, for some of us, it wasn't that long ago. But I say this to point out that it's not just our generations that shape the way that we work and communicate, but also the way that we grew up, the way that our parents raised us, and what our environment was like when we were growing up. And I want to ask everyone who joined us today, what shaped you in the way that you work and interact with others? This is mostly a question for your reflection, but of course, we'd love to see some answers in the chat as well. I know for me, I spent summers at sleepaway camp from age 7 to 17. And one of the biggest lessons that it taught me was about connecting with others and working as a team. I think that's a big reason why I'm so extroverted and I love collaboration and group brainstorming. It's just something that became second nature to me over the years. On the other hand, imagine someone who grew up playing chess competitively. And I'm reading a book about a chess player right now, so that's the example that's fresh in my mind. But that person might naturally lean toward working independently. And, maybe they have strong analytical thinking and problem solving skills. So different experiences really shape how we approach work and how we approach communication.
Thanks, Dahlia. And so I've been teaching leadership for many years, as people know. And one of the things I've said as I've been teaching leadership and leading an organization is you really have to like people and want to see people learn and grow if you're going to be a people leader. And very often people get promoted into people leadership roles because it's that time in their career for a promotion. And that means they're taking on people leadership. But not everyone is cut out for people leadership, because people leadership really has to do with getting to know your people and understanding how do you lead, and taking into consideration all the things we're talking about today, which adds more complexity to a leader. And so my question, Dahlia, to you as you explore the answer to that question really is, what suggestions do you have for leading differently based on the diversity of generations and organizations? So knowing that we're leading, but we're also leading in a very diverse, not only culturally diverse, but generationally diverse organizations typically. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Julie. That's a really great question. And this is by no means a new strategy, but I think that shifting from a managerial approach to a coaching approach can make a huge difference across generations. And this has been something that our firm has been doing for many years, and that is teaching leaders how to lead. It takes a lot of self-awareness to know and understand how you lead and your natural tendencies when it comes to leading others. And for a lot of leaders, it takes practice and intention to really step back and grant more autonomy to their teams. So instead of the traditional focus on managing through telling, coaching is more about asking questions, guiding development, and really letting that person who's being coached drive the conversation. This allows the different generations to feel empowered to bring their unique perspectives and ideas forward. Reducing that power differential between management and employees also fosters more trust and engagement. And by focusing on each person's growths and strengths, leaders can bridge generational gaps and create a more connected team. At the end of the day, research by Kouzes and Posner shows that we all want leaders who are honest, forward focused, inspiring, and competent, regardless of what generation we're born in. So while in this webinar, we're talking a lot about generational differences, I want us to come back to what binds us together rather than what sets us apart. And it really is these 4 traits in leaders. I'm going to pass it back to you, Julie, to talk about the different assumptions we have about the generations.
Thank you, Dahlia. So I love what you just said about what brings us together versus what sets us apart. And you'll hear these, oh, well, that's those Gen Zs or, those new Zoomers who are entering the workplace. And people are making these large brush assumptions. And we cannot, as we know, take a brush and paint it across all generations. And I mentioned to the group, I have children who are in full-time, they're not children, they're young adults who are full-time employees now. And when I look at both of my children, and then again, you think about how you shaped your children, we've shaped our children with a very strong work ethic. I feel like I'm actually saying more to my children, like slow it down a little bit. My son is telling me, these are the years I have to put in the time and the effort and all of those things. And I look at how my daughter is working, and I would never look at my children and make these assumptions that, oh, well, that's Gen Z, that's, Gen Z's for you. So I really, really want to bring home the point that we cannot take a brush and paint it across generations. And each generation brings fabulous insights to the organization, incredible skill sets that we want to be mindful that we are getting rid of some negative connotations or stereotypes that I'll come to in a minute. Because those assumptions we make in our mind, they end up being the filters around how we communicate, how we put up barriers, how we look at the people in our workplaces and how we work with them. So we want to make sure that we are not painting everyone with the same brush and that we are not making assumptions about people based on generations. And that leads me to that word assume. And in grade 6, I had this teacher, her name was Mrs. Spinney. So that's how much I remember that teacher's name. And she wrote assume up on the blackboard back then. And she put, the ass, you, me, and told us, when you assume something, you make an ass out of you and me. And that really stuck with me. And when I make assumptions, you want to take a step back and think about your self-talk, think about why you make those assumptions. And are those assumptions true? Are those the reality? And when you are leading in an organization, really considering the person who you're leading. And we're going to dive into that in a moment. But I do want to just touch on some of these biases and stereotypes and really say, let's reframe them. Let's change the self-talk that we have in our heads and say, is that really, is that bias accurate? And one of the biases, and our firm teaches a lot of leadership development, as I mentioned, but specifically performance management. And when we're teaching performance management, there's a number of biases people can have. And one of them is called the similar to me effect, which is I like you because you're like me. And I think you are just like me. And it could be maybe we went to the same school or maybe we're from the same generation. And we start to think that we like this person because they're like us and they're similar to me. And that isn't the case. And that is a bias. So we want to change our self-talk and really be thinking about what biases or stereotypes do we have? And these are some of the things that we have heard. Oh, boomers, they're all technologically challenged. So I'm not sure about that. I don't think that boomers are all technologically challenged. I think it depends on how open they were to taking in technology. And especially through COVID, boomers had to figure out very quickly how to get onto technology if they wanted to be able to communicate with their families, get more involved in their work that they had if they had to be remote. And so what we do know about boomers is they bring tremendous loyalty and stability to our organizations, and they are not all technologically challenged. If we look at Gen X's, again, my generation, they will say, well, they're resistant to authority. They push back all the time on authority. Because we were one of the first generations to really start asking more questions, as I mentioned earlier. But really, our generation, by asking and pushing back on authority, was because we started to become more independent thinkers. And so what your Gen Xers are bringing to the table are a lot more independent thinking, which is something we know all organizations need. If you look at millennials, you get people saying, oh, millennials, they're just job hoppers. They're going to be here 2-3 years and they're going to move on to the next role. Well, I can tell you for our organization, we have employees who've been with us 10 years, over 10 years, and they are not job hoppers. And they're not job hoppers because we've worked really, really hard at making sure we've created a culture that allows them to do purposeful work, meaningful work. And so if you're concerned that, your millennials are job hoppers, you want to ask the question, what have I done to ensure they're getting to do purposeful work, meaningful work, and they love what they're doing? And I know Dahlia's going to touch on that a little bit more in a moment. We look at Gen Zs. Oh, Gen Zs have a very short attention span. Well, they grew up in a time where, you'd see kids at restaurants and out and about. They've been on iPads since they were 2 years old. So they grew up on a lot of technology. And so that has had them, be very quick on maybe, let's say, distractions around technology, but it's also allowed them to be very good at multitasking and prioritizing and taking on a lot of information at once. They're less likely to get overwhelmed by the mass amounts of information that comes in. I find even myself, when I go on to LinkedIn, I get overwhelmed because I feel like there's such an overwhelming amount of information. Before, it used to be you'd go to Indigo and look at the bookshelf and see all the new business books. Now you turn on your phone and LinkedIn is feeding you all that information very quickly. But Gen Zs don't get overwhelmed by that as much. So again, let's try to start thinking about how those generations are bringing some incredible skill sets to our organization. And so that changing your mindset, I was speaking at the CPAO, the accountants last month as a keynote to a whole group of accountants. And it's because in a lot of these professions, they're having a challenge retaining talent and keeping people engaged because the old mindset it's just not working. And it's not like if you say it many more times, that's going to change how people look at the work that they do. And maybe you need to look in the mirror and change your own mindset. And so that biases we talked about, and continually hoping people will change to how you used to work or how you like to work, I would ask you to really think about changing your mindset about how other people around you work. And we've had to do it with our clients, which has not been easy. Sometimes we're pushing our clients to think differently around their HR policies, around how they're leading, how they look at their employees, and also for ourselves. As a Gen Xer, I have had to really change the way we work. And thankfully, from a technology standpoint, and I'll talk about that next, that in the workforce changing, but also the workplace changing, that just before COVID hit, our company had moved to a whole new system where we had already moved to Teams and we had already started to work in a little bit more of a remote environment. And we had the technological advances. We had our own digital transformation just as COVID was coming on. So we were very fortunate that we could bend our knees and move very quickly overnight when COVID hit. But organizations that weren't prepared for that technological change are still trying to catch up post-COVID. And if they didn't already have a good purposeful culture and environment, those are the companies who've been left behind post-COVID. So we've talked about workforce changes, which is understanding we have the largest span of different generations in the workforce now than ever before. As well, we're in a workplace that is much more digitally savvy, a hybrid workplace that was not here in the way it is now prior to COVID, and then just generally coming back from the time of COVID has really changed our workplace. And so given that we have workforce changes, we have a workplace that has changed, the question is, how are you going to change the way you work with your people in this new landscape? So I'll pass it back to you, Dahlia.
Thanks, Julie. So we really want to emphasize that it's so important to understand your people. Everyone brings unique personalities, communication styles, and motivations. So as a leader, getting to know each person on an individual level can have a huge impact. And how do we learn about our team's individual motivators and needs? At Max People, we're huge advocates of personality and behavioral assessments like MBTI or McQuaig, there's so many, to really uncover what drives each person and how they work best. These tools give insights into people's strengths, their preferences, and how they like to communicate. So when you make the effort to understand your team in this way, they're more likely to feel valued and appreciated. And that goes a long way towards engagement, retention, and loyalty. So leverage whatever tools and strategies you can to really understand your people. We promise it is worth the investment. Priorities are also really different for everyone. And I want to touch specifically on the priorities of work-life balance and career growth. So everyone wants work-life balance, right? And the majority of people want, or, hopefully at some point wanted career growth. Work-life balance is likely going to be a top priority for a parent with young children. Career growth is likely not a priority for someone who's nearing the end of their career. So the point is, priorities differ depending on what stage of your life you're in. So I want to ask you, Julie, do you mind sharing with the group what your current priority is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. Absolutely. The priorities change. And even in our organization, I look at employees who started and they weren't even engaged, and they've been engaged, and they've had weddings, and they've had babies, and we've watched their priorities change over the time they've been in our workplace. We've had employees who work with us who, have had aging parents or other things going on in their lives, and their priorities have changed. And so for me, when I think about where my priorities were, even just a few years back when I had children in activities and I was running to all different dance and hockey and all those type of activities. And now that's not where my priorities have changed now, where I have more, aging parents and, where they need me more now than that, probably more my children need me. Well, I now have more time to really look at our business and the growth of our business and where we want to be in the next 5 to 10 years for myself. So definitely my priorities continue to shift and definitely they're different today than they were 5 or 10 years ago.
Thanks for sharing, Julie. The other day I was talking to a client, and one of their employees didn't show up for their in-office day. They have a couple mandated in-office days. And their reason that they gave was that they needed to work out. And like me, this person was a Gen Z, and our generation really values time for ourselves. But for me, being as early as I am in my career, my top priority is career growth. If my manager asked me to attend a conference or work a few extra hours to complete a deliverable, I wouldn't say no because I needed to go to Pilates, right? I would just do it without a second thought. But with that said, it's really a process of give and take, right? So career growth is here for me and work-life balance is here. They're both high priorities. And one day they might be here or here, who knows, right? I think another priority that I want to mention, and Julie touched on this a little bit earlier, is feeling passionate about what I do. That's a priority for me. And I wanted to share this quote by Marcus Buckingham that really resonated with me. So passion isn't a plan, it's a feeling. Passion is the feeling you have when you're engaged in something that you love and when you feel fulfilled by it. People want to feel passionate about their work. They want to find purpose and meaning in what they do because they have to do it every day, 5 days a week, maybe more. This sense of fulfillment is really what separates engaged, loyal employees from those who are disengaged. So I'm going to pass it back to Julie to really bring everything all together.
Thanks, Dahlia. So collaboration and community, what does this look like? We've heard a lot about these two words have come up a lot, especially when I think about the post-COVID world. People are working a lot more remote. And when you say like the number one thing that people are missing or looking for is to feel connected. And people want to feel connected across generations. So even though people are working in different ways across all generations, people want a sense of community and they want to work in an environment that feels collaborative. And so we want to leave you with a few takeaways, and we also have a downloadable, so stick around, that we're going to put up on the screen that you can download. Is that the number one is fostering an inclusive culture and community. So one of the things that we did as an organization as soon as COVID began was we huddled every single day for the entire first year of COVID. And now we still, this many years after, are huddling as a company 3 times a week. And then, other times, obviously, lots of touch bases with your leader. We do icebreakers. We share our successes. We talk about our challenges. We have our Teams channel where we have lots of shout outs where people get recognized for all the great things that they do. And so this feeling of culture and community. And when we decided to do those morning huddles, it was certainly not to micromanage. It wasn't to make sure that people weren't like still sleeping. It was to have people feel community and to feel connected. So if you don't have that set up across your organization, I highly recommend that's like the number one thing you do is figure out how are you going to do that, and reach out to us, please, because we can help you create that culture that you're looking for. The other thing is embracing the flexible communication styles. So we talked about some people like email, some like texting, some likes camera on, camera off, but you want to be really thinking about, it's not about how you like to communicate, it's opening it up to your audience and your group of who you're working with, and being flexible to know that, there's different styles and you want to be able to match with the people you're working with. So cultivate a learning environment. What we've seen across generations and how that has changed is how people want to learn. And we know that the younger generations coming in have a lot to teach us. And so a learning environment could look like creating reverse mentoring, where you're having Gen Zs mentor Gen Xs. I know our team is teaching me every day. I am often saying, I don't know this, I don't know that, teach me this, show me that, I don't know how to do that. And I'm thrilled to be taught by other people in the organization, how to do things that I may have not known how to do before. So reverse mentoring, pods, and learning from each generation is something we highly recommend. The other thing is celebrating individuality. We talked a lot about getting to know your people, know what drives them, know what they like. Yes, personality plays a role, but get to know how are they shaped? What did they grow up on? And I saw, Stacey, you talked about you grew up a lot on technology. So that's why you're so proficient in a lot of the technology. And the last thing is adapting to the evolving realities of the workplace. So, change, they say, is inevitable. We're going to continually be evolving. We will continue to have changes in our workplace, and being mindful of what that looks like and what the flexibility looks like. I lead a business. We are all in business. We do want to be profitable. We want to have businesses that are here, year after year. But we have to find a way about how do we grow our businesses, bottom line, top line, while having a strong culture. And that may mean changing the way that our work is done, or changing the way how our employees come to work every day and what that looks like. So as we move through and start to open it up for some more questions and comments, I want you to really think about, what got you here. Is it going to get you there? And it probably won't. So what got you here probably won't get you there. Take some time to reflect and think about, how can I change the way I look at the world of work across the generations? As I jump into some of the chat questions, I want to make sure I get this up on the screen, because we have a wonderful downloadable. It gives you 10 effective leadership strategies for leading in a multi-generational workplace. So you can take out your cameras, grab the downloadable, and that will give you a lot of tips from today's session. There are some other questions that have come up that I want to make sure I get to. So, we had, how can we address conflicts that arise from generational misunderstandings? And so I have to say, last year was one of the biggest years I had with mediating conflicts in the workplace. And I still have a few more I'm working on right now with clients. And the mediations and the conflict resolution we've been doing has been a lot about what we talked about today, which is understanding where people are coming from and knowing, what is at the root of where some, and often the things with conflict, and we know it's a little bit the iceberg model, is, what people are typically not happy with and what they're talking about isn't exactly what it's really about. And when you get to the underlying messages behind it, you will get to what the drivers are, the motivators are, and some of the nuances, but also how you can tweak positions, roles. A lot of the times roles have not been defined accurately, or they haven't been defined in a way that people know what's expected of them. So they get to some just general basic HR practices that have to be put in place. So Christina, given our time, did you want to go through any other questions that you've seen or you want us to answer?
So we did have another question come through, and this question is, what strategies can leaders use to bridge communication gaps between generations?
Well, I will let Dahlia jump in as well on this one, but what I would say is that all channels should be used. So one of the ways to make sure that you touch on all of it is to use all channels. I have sometimes people send things to me in Teams, and then I'll miss the Teams thing, and I will. It's important to be vocal about it. So I will say to our team, "You've got to email me also because I may miss it in the Teams. And then if you haven't heard from me by noon, I want you to call me, and then I want us to set up so I may be using 4 different types of communication to make sure that we can move at the pace we need to move at Max People. So I would say definitely do not use one method of how you communicate, and be using multiple channels to ensure that the communication is being done accurately. Dahlia, do you want to add to that? And then we'll be mindful of our time.
Yeah, I think on what you said, Julie, it's important that we understand how people like to communicate. I think that when I'm speaking with clients, then I always ask, like, what is your preferred method of communication? And go with that. There are so many tools available to us, but it will just create inefficiencies if, I'm teamsing you and you're not getting it, or you prefer to communicate via email. It's just one small extra step you can take to figure out how to work with people better. And it really doesn't have anything to do about their generation. Like, you could be from Gen X and you love Teams. You could be from Gen Z and you prefer email. So I think just taking that extra step to understand people and how they like to communicate will really go so far.
Thanks, Dahlia. So I'm going to pass it back to Christina to close off our webinar. And thank you, everyone, for participating today. And Dahlia, for joining me in the facilitation.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Dahlia, and thank you, Julie, for providing such insightful information. And we hope you found this presentation very informative. And thank you to our community for joining us today and asking such great questions. We really appreciate your participation. As a reminder, a recording of the session and a feedback survey will be made available. And please take a moment to answer, as we appreciate your opinion. If you would like more information on the topics that we have discussed today, you can check out our resources and our blogs page on our website, or reach out to the team at Max People and Rodney Employment Law. Please keep an eye out for an invitation to our upcoming virtual events, and also stay connected with us and follow us on our LinkedIn pages to stay up to date with all things HR and employment law. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.